I and BF seem to be at different stages of life and I don't know what to do. I am 28, and my boyfriend is 24. Though the age difference isn't vast, it feels like we are standing on opposite shores of a wide, turbulent river. I can't shake the feeling that our lives are unfolding on entirely different timelines, and I am left grappling with a decision I'm unsure how to make. We met 4 months ago, a fleeting yet impactful span of time that now feels like a blur of emotions. From the first moment, there was an undeniable spark. We clicked instantly, as though our conversations had a rhythm only we could hear. His humor was sharp and playful, but not in a way that overwhelmed me. It was perfectly balanced, like he knew exactly how to keep things light without diminishing their meaning. Every time we spoke, I felt the thrill of anticipation, a sensation I hadn't experienced in years. He is an extraordinary man, kind to a fault, attentive in ways that made my heart ache, and undeniably handsome. His confidence and charm seemed effortless, and his accomplishments shone like a beacon, naturally drawing me in. There was an energy about him that suggested ambition, a man with his eyes set on the horizon, chasing dreams I admired but didn't fully understand. It was intoxicating. I found myself falling faster than I ever thought possible. It wasn't just the chemistry that bound us together. From the outset, we shared a vision for the future. I have always dreamed of building a family one day, a warm, loving home filled with laughter and stability. When he told me he shared that goal, it felt as though our futures were aligned, as though we were starting this journey on the same page. Things escalated quickly. He introduced me to his mother, a gesture I knew was not made lightly. Meeting her was a revelation. She welcomed me warmly, treating me as though I already belonged to their family. She even confided in me, praising her son's character and expressing how much she liked me. In those moments, it felt as though I had stepped into a dream. He wasn't shy about expressing his feelings, either. He told me outright that he had fallen for me, a confession that came with an intensity that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He made every effort to show me his affection, often going out of his way to ensure I felt valued. If I needed help, he was there. If I doubted myself, he became my biggest cheerleader, showering me with compliments and reassurance. His kindness seemed endless, and for someone like me, who has struggled with low self-confidence for years, his support was like a balm to my wounded heart. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, cherished even. It was as though he was determined to heal parts of me I had long since resigned to living with. But relationships are never one-sided, and I was just as eager to support him in return. He shared his struggles with me, the weight of financial burdens, the strain of familial expectations, and the frustration of not yet having found stable footing in his career. These weren't small challenges, they were mountains he carried on his shoulders every day. I admired his vulnerability, the way he trusted me enough to lay bare the hardships that haunted him. I wanted to be his rock, to show him that I was in this for the long haul. He deserved someone who could help shoulder his burdens, someone who wouldn't turn away when things got hard. I believed in him, and I believed in us. At least, that's what I told myself in those early days when the glow of our connection made the future feel bright and limitless. We are both teachers, though our paths in this shared profession couldn't feel more different now. I have been fortunate to work in government schools, a career that, while demanding, has given me financial stability and a sense of purpose. My salary is good, my living arrangements are comfortable, and though my family is far away, I have carved out a life for myself in a flat that I call my own. When we first met, he was working in a school too. I admired his dedication to teaching. It takes a certain kind of passion to guide young minds, and I believed we shared that. I thought of us as equals in our profession, two people who could grow together, not only as individuals but as partners building a stable future. Early on, I imagined the possibility of him continuing in his current role for a while, maybe taking some exams, and eventually moving into a better position. It seemed like a natural progression for both of us, a way to ensure that we would be on solid ground as we moved forward. Stability, after all, is the cornerstone of any meaningful partnership, and I wanted that for us. He also told me he was living by himself, which added to my admiration for him. Living independently, managing one's finances and responsibilities, it all spoke to a level of maturity that I found reassuring. I felt we were on the same wavelength, that our individual paths were converging in a way that would complement each other beautifully. But as the months passed, cracks began to form in the image I had built of him, and of us. It was a slow unraveling, starting with small discrepancies that I tried to ignore, dismissing them as misunderstandings or miscommunications. The truth came to light in the most unexpected way through his mother. In a conversation that was both casual and revelatory, she mentioned that he still had some classes to complete and wouldn't graduate until the end of this year. The words hit me like a sudden gust of wind, disorienting and unwelcome. I felt blindsided. How had I not known this? My mind raced, piecing together fragments of our conversations and realizing the gaps I hadn't noticed before. He hadn't graduated yet. That alone wasn't a deal-breaker, but it shifted the foundation of what I thought I understood about his life. Then there was the matter of his job, or rather, the lack of it. Not long after we met, he left the school where he had been working. At first, I thought it was a temporary setback, perhaps a calculated decision to focus on finishing his studies. But the pattern that followed was troubling. He stayed at home with his parents for a while, a situation that seemed to amplify his frustrations. He spoke often about the pressure his family placed on him, particularly because of the debts he had accumulated over the past few years. The way he described it, his family's expectations felt suffocating to him, a constant source of conflict and stress. When he eventually found another job, I allowed myself a glimmer of hope, thinking this was a step in the right direction. But that too was short-lived. He quit after a minor inconvenience, a decision he justified with endless complaints about how unfairly he had been treated. I tried to be understanding, to listen without judgment, but each time he walked away from an opportunity, it felt like he was also walking further away from the future we had imagined together. In some ways, I could empathize. Life isn't easy for either of us. I, too, carry the weight of financial burdens, debts that I am determined to pay off by next July. It hasn't been easy, but I've managed to balance my responsibilities, knowing that the sacrifices I make now will pave the way for a better tomorrow. But with him, it felt different. His debts weren't just numbers on a ledger, they were a shadow that loomed over every aspect of his life. And instead of facing them head-on, it seemed as though he allowed them to dictate his choices, his moods, and even his relationships. I wanted to help him, to be the supportive partner I had always envisioned myself to be. But as the weight of his struggles grew heavier, I found myself questioning whether I was strong enough to carry them alongside my own. The man I had fallen for, the ambitious, driven individual I thought I knew, was becoming a stranger. And yet, I couldn't entirely let go of the hope that he would rediscover the spark that had drawn me to him in the first place. Then his mother stepped into the picture, weaving herself into the fabric of our relationship in ways that felt both intrusive and strangely comforting. Her advice came in the form of gentle nudges, though the weight of her words carried a subtle expectation. She spoke to me as though I had taken on the role of his guide, the person who could steer him toward stability and help him realize the responsibilities he seemed to evade. At first, I told myself this was a good thing. A mother wanting the best for her son was natural, and perhaps she saw something in me, something strong and reliable that could anchor him. But the more she spoke of his potential and how I could help him reach it, the more I felt the crushing pressure of an unspoken obligation. Still, I tried to rise to the challenge. I listened to him, empathized with his struggles, and reassured him when he felt overwhelmed. I even let myself entertain the thought of marriage, not just as a romantic milestone but as a way to bind us together in a shared effort to rebuild his life. I imagined us as partners, tackling his problems head-on, fixing the cracks and flaws that threatened to pull him under. But the fantasy of fixing things together began to crumble under the weight of reality. His problems didn't dissipate, they multiplied. Each conversation seemed to lead back to the same cycle of complaints, the pressure from his family, the lack of direction in his life, the debts that loomed over him like a dark cloud. He started saying things that unsettled me, phrases like, "I'm nothing without you," or, "You're the only one who can fix me." At first, I tried to dismiss these as fleeting moments of vulnerability. But over time, they began to gnaw at me. Instead of feeling flattered by his dependence, I felt trapped. His words, though spoken with love, carried an implication that I was his only lifeline, his sole source of hope. It was overwhelming. I began to notice a shift in myself. The warmth and affection I had once felt for him started to wane, replaced by a growing sense of detachment. My heart, which had once leapt at the sound of his voice, now felt weighed down by an invisible burden. It wasn't that I didn't care for him, I did. But the intensity of his reliance on me made it impossible to breathe. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. I told him how I felt that I couldn't fake being as close and loving as I once was, not when my own feelings had grown so distant. I tried to be gentle, to explain that my withdrawal wasn't a conscious choice but a reflection of the overwhelming worry that had taken root in my heart. But my words struck a nerve. He snapped, his voice laced with anger and hurt. He accused me of playing him, of making promises I had no intention of keeping. "You made me believe we had a future together," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "And now you're just pulling away, like none of it mattered." His words cut deep because, in some ways, I knew he was right. I had been too quick to dive into the fantasy of what we could be, too eager to play the part of the supportive partner. I had showered him with affection, built castles in the air about our future, and encouraged him to dream alongside me. And now, faced with the reality of his struggles, I was retreating, unable to sustain the love and support I had so freely given before. But what could I do? I couldn't force myself to feel something that no longer came naturally. I couldn't fake the closeness we once had, not when the weight of his problems had pushed me so far away emotionally. This wasn't the first time I had found myself in this position. My past relationships had followed a similar pattern. Waiting for the right time, waiting for the guy to get his life in order, waiting for stability that always seemed just out of reach. It was exhausting. And now, here I was again, staring down the prospect of waiting years I couldn't predict for him to piece his life together. I knew, rationally, that at 24, he was in a natural stage of life. He was trying to find himself, to carve out his own path in the world. I couldn't fault him for that. But knowing this didn't make the situation any easier. It didn't erase the gnawing uncertainty in my chest, the quiet voice whispering that his love and interest, no matter how intense, might not be enough to sustain us. I was torn. On one hand, I felt guilty for pulling away, for not being the unwavering pillar of support he needed. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore the coldness that had settled in my heart. The feeling that this relationship was suffocating me. Our relationship has another layer of complexity: distance. We live in different cities, and while the distance isn't insurmountable, it creates a chasm that feels wider than geography alone. The financial strain we both face means that meeting up for dates or shared experiences, the kind that might rekindle our connection, has become an impossible luxury. Without these moments to ground us, to remind us of the joy we once felt in each other's presence, our relationship has started to feel like a weight I am carrying alone. The natural flow of feelings, the easy rhythm of spending time together, has been replaced by long phone calls filled with complaints, apologies, and emotional pleas. It's as though we're caught in a loop, unable to move forward but too entangled to let go. When I finally mustered the courage to explain myself, to tell him how I was feeling, his reaction shattered me. He shouted, his voice wrought with frustration and pain, telling me that no one would ever love me the way he does. The words echoed in my mind, their sharp edges cutting into my confidence. Was he right? Was I throwing away something rare and precious because of my own coldness, my inability to weather the storms of a relationship? Then, just as quickly as his anger erupted, he apologized. His voice softened, his words turning from anger to desperation. He asked me to give him time, to let him prove that he could change, that he could fix everything for me, for us. He promised he would do whatever it took, painting a picture of a future where all the problems that loomed over us now would be distant memories. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to take his hand and step into the world he was describing, where love was enough to overcome every obstacle. But deep in my heart, I felt a coldness I couldn't shake. It wasn't just about his promises or his love anymore, it was about me. I found myself consumed by doubt. What if he was right? What if I walked away from him and found myself alone, unable to find someone who would love me as fiercely and deeply as he did? His love had been a constant, a lifeline in a world that often felt overwhelming and isolating. Could I really turn my back on that, knowing how rare it was to find? But even as these thoughts swirled in my mind, another voice whispered doubts of a different kind. Was it fair to stay with him when my feelings had grown so distant? Was I even capable of being the supportive partner he needed, the person he saw as his salvation? Or would I only drag him down further, both of us stuck in a relationship that had become more about obligation than love? The suffocating weight of these questions pressed down on me, leaving me paralyzed. I felt like I was failing not just him, but myself. I didn't know what I wanted anymore, and the thought of making the wrong choice filled me with a dread I couldn't escape. What made it worse was the gnawing sense of guilt. He had been so loving, so caring and supportive, and yet here I was, contemplating walking away. What kind of person does that make me? Was I incapable of love? Or had I simply reached my limit, worn down by the endless cycle of waiting and hoping? In the end, I'm left with no answers, only a suffocating sense of uncertainty. I feel like I need to step back from everything, to isolate myself from the noise of this relationship and figure out who I am, what I want, and whether I have the strength to love someone or even myself. As much as I care for him, I can't ignore the coldness in my heart, the voice that tells me something is fundamentally broken between us. Maybe it's not his fault. Maybe it's not mine. Maybe we're simply at different places in life, trying to bridge a gap that neither of us has the tools to cross. For now, all I know is that I need space to think, to breathe, and to rediscover the parts of myself that have been lost in the chaos. Whether that means walking away or finding a way back to him, I don't know yet. But I can't ignore this feeling anymore, no matter how painful the truth might be.